Hello, my name is Zachary Potter. I am a third year student here at GCU. I am a business management major with a minor in Christian theology, and today I'm presenting on Vietnam for my Business 390 class. I hope you enjoy. So, Vietnam is located in Southeast Asia. France colonized Vietnam during 1859 and by 1887 established French Indochina. Vietnam was a colony, not a colonizer. The French colonized Vietnam primarily for economic reasons, like access to raw materials, rice, rubber, minerals. It was also a strategic positioning for trade routes to China. They justified through this. They justified this through their civilization mission, but it was really about exploitation. The impact was largely negative for the Vietnamese people. The French seized land and created large plantations, that which forced small farmers to become laborers. By 1939, 80% of the population was illiterate and most lived in poverty. This exploitation fueled nationalist movements that eventually led to independence in 1954 after the French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. Three dimensions of globalization. Globalization transformed Vietnam through three key dimensions: economically, politically, and culturally. First up, economically. The 1986 Doi Moi reforms shifted Vietnam from a centralized to a market economy. This was huge. It led to massive poverty reduction and GDP growth. WTO membership in 2007 fully integrated Vietnam into global trade. And since 2000, Vietnam's exports have grown 15% annually, faster than China. Politically, joining an ASEAN in 1995 gave Vietnam a platform for regional cooperation and helped prepare the country for WTO accession. Importantly, Vietnam kept its one-party system while opening economically, showing globalization doesn't require democracy. And then culturally, globalization brought Western consumer culture, technology transfer, and global ideas. But Vietnam has worked to preserve its culture identity while still modernizing. Together, these three dimensions elevated Vietnam from developing to emerging economic status. Pros and cons of globalization in Vietnam. Globalization has brought major benefits but also serious challenges to Vietnam. On the positive side, economic gains have been remarkable. GDP growth has consistently exceeded 7% annually, and poverty dropped from 58% in 1993 to under 5% today. Foreign investment created millions of jobs in manufacturing, and Vietnam even became a major rice exporter after decades of food shortages. However, challenges still exist. Income inequality has grown significantly between urban and rural areas. Vietnam has an $83 billion trade deficit with China because it relies heavily on Chinese machinery and components for manufacturing. Rapid industrialization has caused environmental damage, and Vietnam's export-dependent economy makes it vulnerable to global economic shocks. The key going forward is maximizing globalization's benefits while addressing inequality, environmental protection, and economic diversification for more sustainable development. Samsung in Vietnam MNC analysis. Samsung from South Korea is Vietnam's biggest foreign investment success story. With $23.2 billion invested, Samsung had a 2024 revenue of $62.5 billion in Vietnam. That is a huge portion of the country's total exports. Samsung entered Vietnam for several reasons: competitive labor cost, strategic location in Southeast Asia, government incentives, and political stability. As a U.S.-China trade tension grew, Vietnam became attractive for the China Plus One diversification strategy. Initial challenges included skills shortages in specialized manufacturing and infrastructure that needed upgrading. Samsung had to invest heavily in training programs, but the opportunities were enormous. Vietnam became Samsung's largest manufacturing base globally, even surpassing South Korea for certain products. By mid-2025, Samsung's factories had produced 2 billion mobile phones. Samsung's success attracted other electronics companies to Vietnam, solidifying the country's position as a global manufacturing hub. Now for international institutions. Two international institutions have been critical for Vietnam's development: the WTO and ASEAN. Vietnam joined the WTO in January 2007 as the 150th member. This was transformative. It allowed full integration into the global trading system and opened the floodgates for FDI and exports. Vietnam had to reform hundreds of laws to comply with WTO standards, which improved transparency for foreign investors and gave Vietnam enforceable rights in trade disputes. Vietnam joined ASEAN in 1995, which provided different but equally important benefits. ASEAN served as a training ground for regional cooperation before the more demanding WTO ascension. Beyond economics, ASEAN provides political stability and collective diplomatic weight. It also enabled Vietnam's participation in mega regional agreements like RCEP and CPTPP. Both institutions had been instrumental in Vietnam's rise as an economic country, providing the frameworks and market access necessary for sustained growth. The CPTPP represents Vietnam's most ambitious trade agreement. Vietnam signed with 11 other countries, and it took effect in January 2019. The CPTPP is comprehensive and high standard. It requires eventual elimination of tariffs on 99% of goods, a 3-0 standard of zero tariffs, zero subsidies, zero barriers. Beyond tariffs, it includes strong commitments on labor rights, environmental protection, and digital trade, pushing Vietnam towards higher governance standards. The impact has been significant. In 2024, Vietnam's exports to CPTPP countries grew over 20%. This was Vietnam's first trade agreement with Canada, Mexico, and Peru, opening entirely new markets. Vietnamese textiles, seafood, footwear, and electronics all benefit from preferential access. Importantly, CPTPP members countries are now Vietnam's main source of trade surplus, helping Vietnam diversify away from dependence on China to access higher value developed markets. Trade partners and exchange rates. Vietnam's largest trading partner is China at $205 billion in 2024, but this relationship is imbalanced. Vietnam imports $144 billion from China, but only exports $61 billion, creating a $83 billion deficit. Most imports are machinery and components needed for manufacturing. The U.S. is Vietnam's largest export market at $119.5 billion in exports, creating a record $104.6 billion surplus. This massive surplus has raised concerns about potential U.S. trade actions. Vietnam's major exports are electronics like phones and computers, plus textiles, footwear, and furniture. Most imports are electronic components, machinery, and raw materials, mostly inputs for export production. Exchange rates significantly impact trade. When the Vietnamese dong weakens, export becomes cheaper and more competitive, boosting sales, but a weaker dong makes imports more expensive, increasing production costs. Vietnam's central bank carefully manages this balance to support export competitiveness while avoiding import inflation. This is a crucial part for sustaining Vietnam's export-led growth model. Conclusion. I selected Vietnam because its transformation story is remarkable. In just 4 decades, it went from a war-devastated economy to one of the world's fastest-growing markets. Poverty dropped from over 50% to under 5%, demonstrating the transformative power of smart, market-oriented reforms. Vietnam provided a clear example of strategic globalization, the gradual process, Doi Moi in 1986, ASEAN in 1995, WTO in 2007, shows how developing countries can successfully leverage globalization while maintaining sovereignty. Vietnam is also highly relevant today as the center of Chinese Plus One manufacturing diversification, with companies like Samsung and Apple suppliers operating there. Key takeaways. International institutions like WTO and ASEAN provide crucial frameworks for smaller countries to compete globally. Strategic FDI can transform economies, but challenges like inequality and sustainability require ongoing attention. And for a fun fact, Vietnam is the world's largest cashew nut producer and second largest coffee exporter after Brazil. This shows Vietnam has balanced manufacturing growth with agricultural exports, something many countries struggle to achieve. Thank you for listening to my project. Thank you for watching again. Here are my references that I used to finish this project. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye.